Have you ever wondered what happens when a company's obsession with efficiency goes way, way too far? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolutely wild story of Stratagem Global, a company that so perfectly documented its own downfall, it's like they were writing their own obituary while they were still alive.
It really all kicks off with this one single question. And this wasn't from some outsider or a critic. This came from the company's own chief strategy officer, Victoria Swift-Norath. It's the kind of question that only comes up when you're watching a series of seemingly logical, rational decisions add up to something, well, monstrous. Now, this isn't some official definition you'd find in a textbook. No, this was the brutally honest, private definition of optimization that was actually floating around inside the company. And it just perfectly nails the core conflict of this entire story, that terrifying gap between the clean, sanitized language of the boardroom and the messy human reality on the ground.
See, at Stratagem Global, optimization wasn't just a business strategy. It was basically a religion. The core belief was that any problem, no matter how complex, could be solved with better data, cleaner metrics, and just ruthless logic. This whole mindset was about to be pushed to its absolute breaking point by an initiative they called Project Calibrate.
So, Project Calibrate was the endgame of this whole ideology. The plan? It was as simple as it was devastating. Fire thousands and thousands of people and replace everything they did with automated algorithmic systems. Now, of course, it was sold to everyone as innovation, as the next step in evolution. But on the inside, a lot of people knew exactly what it was: the chase for perfect mathematical efficiency with zero regard for the human fallout.
So as Project Calibrate starts to shift from this, a theoretical nightmare on a PowerPoint slide into a very real impending thing, the company's leadership just fractures. And this wasn't your typical office politics. No, this was a deep, fundamental split between two camps who saw the world in completely different ways.
On one side, you had this small group of 8 executives who started calling themselves the Anomalies, or the Witnesses. These were the people who just couldn't unsee the human cost, the names and the families behind the numbers on a spreadsheet. And on the other side, they were called the Residue, the Believers. They fully bought into the project's cold logic, seeing it as not just necessary, but almost righteous.
And what's fascinating is that this wasn't just about job titles. It was a war of ideas fought by these incredible archetypes. You had the witnesses, like the satirist and the historian, whose whole focus was on documenting what was really happening. And then you had the believers, the propagandist, the accelerationist, who were all about manufacturing a new reality.
The Anomalies, they knew they couldn't stop Project Calibrate. I mean, the machine was just too big, too powerful. The logic had taken over. So if you can't sabotage the system, what do? Well, they chose a completely different strategy, something far more subtle and maybe even more powerful.
So they didn't leak secrets to the press, they didn't stage walkouts. Their weapon was truth, and they decided to wield it with the precision of a scalpel. They started creating this perfect parallel archive, a completely undeniable record of what the company was actually doing, stripped of all the corporate jargon. And a huge part of this secret archive was something they called the Devil's Dictionary. It was basically a translation guide for all the corporate doublespeak. So restructuring wasn't about making things better, it was, and I quote, a massacre with PowerPoint. Human capital became humans we want to depreciate. This wasn't just being cynical, it was an act of rebellion.
And listen, their archive wasn't just about clever wordplay. It got incredibly dark. They started to quantify the real human cost. Using actual statistical models from similar mass layoffs, they calculated the price of all this efficiency in human lives. Their prediction was chilling. 18 people would likely die by suicide, just from the first phase.
Okay, so here's where it gets crazy. This act of just witnessing, of documenting the truth, it had a totally unexpected effect. It didn't stop the machine, not at first, but it started to make the machine aware of itself. And that awareness triggered a chain reaction, a total collapse cascade that nobody saw coming.
It all kicked off with this incredible, symbolic act. 6,000 paper cranes, one for each employee being fired, suddenly appeared in the main lobby. Then, a little while later, the secret archive gets leaked internally and it spreads like wildfire. That new awareness leads to key people just up and quitting. And once the archive finally leaked to the public, the stock price completely cratered, which led to a total collapse and, eventually, bankruptcy.
And the financial fallout? I mean, it was immediate and it was brutal. The second the truth from that archive hit the public, the market just panicked.
Investors ran for the hills, because who wants to be invested in a company whose own internal documents prove that it's not just ruthless, but fundamentally broken? Truth, it turns out, has a price.
So how did this happen? How did a collection of documents take down a whole company? Well, it acted like what you might call a consciousness virus. First, you have the cranes. That's the emotional gut punch. It turns an abstract number, 6,000 layoffs, into something real and visible. Then bam, the leaked archive provides the logical proof, the undeniable facts behind that emotion. That 1-2 punch made it impossible for people to keep pretending, which triggered the mass exodus that the company just couldn't survive.
So in the end, Stratagem Global was just gone. 40,000 people lost their jobs. A massive corporation just vanished. And all that was left behind was that meticulously compiled archive and this huge lingering question about what any of it was really for.
And here's the absolute kicker. The documentation was so perfect, so incredibly accurate, that in the company's final public address, the last CEO basically just confessed. He admitted the whole catastrophe wasn't some accident or a surprise. It was a completely predictable outcome that their own analysts, the witnesses, had mapped out with perfect clarity months before it all went down.
And that, of course, brings us to the really hard question, doesn't it? I mean, if you think about it, the witnesses failed. They didn't save the company. They didn't save the 40,000 jobs. So, what's the value of documenting a catastrophe that you know you can't prevent? What is the point of having a perfect record of a total disaster? Well, maybe the answer lies in what's left. The company, the stock price, the fancy offices, all of that is gone, disappeared. But the archive, that story, meticulously recorded, that survived. It's a stark, detailed warning, a case study in where these inhuman systems logically end up. And maybe that's the point. The value of a record isn't always to change the outcome. Sometimes it's just to warn the rest of us.